During our previous examples, we have seen how a cluster of workers were started when we try to execute a power-for loop. And we had no control at that point on how many workers are going to be in our cluster. Um, and what was started was the default cluster configuration. What we are going to find out during this section is how to create and edit cluster configurations. The cluster configuration basically defines the number of workers you want in your pool and some other attributes like how long a cluster should remain active if it is idle, and whether there will be files transferred to the workers or not, and so on. We are going to see all of those shortly. To get access to our cluster configurations, we need to use on the home tab the parallel icon. Click on that and create and manage clusters is the most useful one. Select that. Now, before I started showing you all these, I had already prepared some clusters configurations. So I've now got 3 different cluster configurations. But when you just installed Parallel MATLAB toolbox, you will find that you only have the local configuration, which is there. So I had created large and medium, but the local is the one that will be created for you during the installation of the Parallel Computing Toolbox. And on the right hand side of the panel, it tells you the properties of this cluster. And what I would point out importantly is that it says number of workers to start on your local machine is number of cores, and this is what I was telling you about the how MATLAB will decide the number of workers will be the number of cores that are available in the default configuration. But you can change all those as well. So there is an edit button at the bottom right hand corner. If you click on there, you'll be able to edit all the fields here. What I'm going to do is to perhaps not to muck around with my clusters. I'm just going to create yet another cluster. I'll show you how to create a cluster. I think the easiest one would be probably you'll just have the local cluster. You can right button it, click on it, and duplicate it. Right? I'll say duplicate. Now it's duplicated it, and now I've got another cluster called medium copy. I can change its name. I can rename it, for example. I can call it test cluster plus something like that. Test cluster. Okay. So that is this a new name. And there is also, when you right click it, option to set it as default. That is the first item on the pop-up menu, you can see. So having created a cluster, you can also make it your default cluster. But I'll need to show you editing it now. So click on the edit button. And here we are. So description of this cluster, you can actually give a description of your choice here. And the number of workers, let me change it. Let's make it 6, for example. And if I was to say default, then it would be a bit like the local cluster. It will have only as many workers as there are cores. So you can actually say number of computational threads to use each worker. So if you were to set this to 2, for example, then what will happen is that if you have n number of cores, you'll then have twice as many workers, n times 2 workers, because by allowing the two threads to run one worker, you can allow two workers in effect to run there. This goes down to, I won't go into greater detail, but there is a feature of the CPUs that allows multi-threading, and that can be switched on and off, so that particularly in Linux environments you can start running jobs or tasks and allowing them to share the cores at any given instance. And there are other things like job storage location. You don't need to worry about that, and automatically send calls to the cluster. You can leave it as default because it's a local cluster. It's not going to send anything to anywhere as well. But those will be important when we are working with clusters of computers, whereby the computers do not have a uniform or unified view of the file system. Luckily for us, Shark cluster and the Bessemer cluster, the workers all have a uniform or unified view of the file store. So we do not need to set that, for example, to true. We can leave it as default, or set it to false, either way. Right. So right, I think I'll call it, I'll save this now, done. So now I have a cluster called test class. So I can, from now on, use that in par cluster commands. So let me just close this now. Well, before that, I want to show you yet another way of starting up your cluster, or the default cluster. That is on the left hand corner of your main MATLAB window. If you click on it, and you have the options of parallel preferences, but you have start parallel pool option as well. So I could click on that, and that will start the default cluster, which was medium, as you can see. So it's a starting parallel pool on medium cluster. So remember that we had the medium cluster, which was the default one. Right, so it has now told us that it has started the cluster with 4 workers running. There is a command called GCP, which, if there were no workers running, it will also start the default cluster automatically. But if you already got our cluster up and running, then it will report its properties. So as you can see, its properties are those. For example, I could say, let's say h1 is equal to GCP. So I can h1 dot num workers and it tells you the properties of it. You can see, you can access your uh, clusters properties that way as well. So the once your parallel pool is working, if you finish with it and you don't want to wait 30 minutes before it sort of kills itself, and you just want to close it, you can do it in a number of ways. Again, we can click on this button and say shut down parallel pool, and that will stop the workers running. Or delete GCP is another option that I can, this will close the cluster. Because I set H, this is the handle of the computing pool, I could have typed delete H1, it would have also worked. So I press the button and you can see that it is now shutting down the cluster, and it's done so. Par cluster command is a, suppose you don't want to start the default cluster, you want to work with another cluster, one of those that we had chosen earlier. Let's have a quick look again. So we had test class. So let's try to par cluster test class. I need to put it in quotes. It's a string test class. And it is telling me that test class is a local cluster, and it has got 6 number of workers and so on. But what this is returning us is actually a handle to the cluster. We haven't really started running it yet. So let's save the handle first of all. Let's say HC is equal to, I can do it this way, HC par cluster. Now that has saved the handle, so I can now use that handle in a powerpool command. For example, I can say powerpool HC. Remember this time this is a handle, and we not we don't specify it as if it's a string. It's actually a value there. Okay, so this should now, so HC equal to par cluster, it only returned us the handle of the cluster that we have already saved, but it hasn't started anything yet. It's the powerpool command that will start it up. Press enter, now it is starting it up. This time it will wait a bit longer because it is trying to start up 6 MATLAB workers. As a matter of fact, I now am running the risk of entirely crashing, closing down MATLAB altogether, because it will have to find enough memory to run 6 copies plus this one. This is our client, 7 copies of MATLAB, all on the memory that I have here. Luckily, it managed to start it, and you can see that I now have 6 number of workers on this. Right, we are going to stop our demonstration here. We're going to go and have a look, a visit through the slides which are referencing those examples that we have just tried.